And we are live. I'm here with my new friend Joel. Joel, how you doing?
Good. Yeah, thanks for having me on the show.
Yeah, we don't really know each other, so it's going to be a getting to know you conversation, as it usually is on my podcast. So I'd like you to start by introducing yourself, talk about your background, and this is a sort of like a religious podcast. So I like to get if there's any sort of faith or philosophy aspect to your upbringing, your adult life. Just talk about that, even if it's just veganism or whatever. I'll take what I can get. But any sort of philosophy, faith. I think I saw in your bio that you did study philosophy a bit. So, and you may have dabbled in religion. You may have even been raised with religion. So just fill me in and walk us through the journey up until today, where you're at today. Okay?
Yeah, sure. So, yeah, I'm not familiar with your podcast. You're not familiar with me. I think we're under 24 hours of you haven't
Yeah.
asked me to be on the show. So,
Yeah.
um, I didn't even know what the podcast was about coming on, but that's part of what my biggest passion in life, which is philosophy. And part of philosophy is trying to critically examine all aspects of life and being willing to, on a dime, talk with somebody about, deep issues and be willing to, have a well-formed and thought-out opinion yourself and be willing to change your mind in light of new evidence and new arguments and have good conversations that way. So my background is I have a philosophy podcast called From Nowhere to Nothing. And usually the way that goes is we look at all kinds of topics. We tend towards some of the, typical philosophical topics like God and time. But we also study anything. We've done an episode on Disney princesses, right? Or entertainment franchise reboots, that sort of thing. And, philosophically, what is the driving impetus behind anything in life, right? And we like to look at formative aspects, what typical thought about them is. We like to look at what we conceive of as the essence of them. And we also like to ask speculative questions about, in light of their history and what we have taken away from examining them, how it's going to affect humanity in the future, that sort of thing. Outside of that, I'm a PhD student in psychology. I am an Army veteran. I'm a multi-instrumentalist music producer. So I've got some albums online that you can listen to. I'm a painter. I just finished my first novel recently. I do some philosophy writings as well. Just all kinds of hobbies, 3D printing. For work, I'm a production manager for a manufacturing plant. So just kind of a wide range of interests.
Yeah.
That's kind of the background. As far as religious sort of thought, I grew up Protestant Christian. My dad was actually a pastor.
Ah.
So that was sort of my upbringing from the very beginning up through, my late teenage years. And then, after going to college, getting into philosophy, you start to question some of those beliefs. And then there's things about them that you hold on to and that you think are valuable and that you see as, in some cases necessary, in some cases impossible to refute. And then there's other things that you see and you go, yeah, you know what, maybe I'm going to drop this. Maybe this isn't useful or true to me anymore. That kind of thing.
How many siblings have you got?
I have two. So I have a brother who's 4 years older than me and a sister who is 2.5 years younger than me.
And are they like you, atheist, agnostic, or what's your status today?
So my siblings, are both Christian. My
Okay.
sister, I would say strongly so. My brother, a little bit weaker. I would consider myself necessarily agnostic, right? I think that, with my main passion in life being philosophy and, critical examination of thoughts, and then, just kind of looking at these things a little bit deeper, I think that atheism might be the least appealing standpoint.
Mhm.
But I also think that the major organized religions on the whole have a hard time holding up under scientific scrutiny in a lot of ways, which isn't to say that there aren't very valuable things that they have.
If you had to pick a religion, it's a silly question, but which one would you choose? I asked one friend and he said voodoo, but anything, everything's on the table. You could pick anything, no matter how silly. Scientology, whatever, maybe Judaism. I don't know. Buddhism. What are some of the religions where you think, oh, I got a little bit more respect for this religion than that one?
Yeah. I think that this question probably changes for me on a regular basis depending on what I'm studying philosophically. But at the moment, I'm really into Taoism, so Lao Tzu's Tao Te Ching, that sort of thing.
That's cool.
Because I think that it sort of captures, philosophically, it captures this this feeling that we all have that there's something bigger than us and there's something outside of the material universe. But it doesn't really attempt to personify it or give it a deity in any way. You sort of learn these paradoxical lessons about it, and it teaches you lessons about life in such a way that seem real and genuine and useful, but at the same time sort of mysterious and mystical in a way that sort of rings true to how we experience life on a regular basis,
Did you study any martial arts at all?
No, I have not.
Oh, come on. You got such a wide breadth of hobbies. I thought that would be on there somewhere. That's in maybe it's in your future. Maybe it's in your future.
Yeah.
In the military training, they don't give you any jiu-jitsu or anything?
Yeah, a little bit. So they call it combatives and they have different levels. I never went too far. It was all defensive stuff. If you're getting attacked, this is what you do to get out of certain holds and things. But that was about it.
Okay. And what about your love life? You're a very good-looking guy. So did you meet a woman and get married and have babies, or not yet?
So yes, I do have a wife. We've been married about 12 years.
Oh, wow.
So we don't have any kids, which is probably why I have as many hobbies as I do. but yeah.
Oh, any plans for kids, or not going to happen?
No, we decided we were together for about 6 years before we got married. So we're going on, almost 2 decades now. And we decided pretty early on that it wasn't something that was going to be in our future.
Okay. So what's she like? What are you allowed to say about her on the public live stream?
Yeah, she's about as far from me as you can get, which is good.
Is she a woman? I'm kidding.
Yeah.
It's 2023. You gotta ask.
Yeah. Nope. Yeah, she's a woman for sure. But she and a lot of people don't gather a lot about you through podcasting, right? Because your job on here is to talk, right? But in real life, I am an introvert to an extreme level, right? So I stay at home and I make albums and I paint and I do projects and I write and I do these things. But in terms of social interaction, a lot of them I get forced into. And my wife likes to tell the joke that, introverts, of which I'm an archetype, don't make friends. They get adopted by extroverts, right? So her and my best friend are these outgoing, bubbly people who break through your shell, right? I'm in a public circumstance and I'm a wallflower and I'm just kind of sitting back and not talking to anybody. And they're the two crazy people that can look at somebody who's putting off these vibes that don't talk to me, I don't want to be talked to, and they just pick away at you until they get you going. And then, before you know, you have a lifelong friend or a wife, right? So yeah, very, very outgoing, very bubbly and cheery. And so a little bit different than I am, but we mesh very well.
Does she get along with your BFF?
Yeah. So they're almost the same people. That's the joke, is that they're the same people, and him and his wife and I are we call ourselves cats and dogs, right? Me and his wife are cats. My wife and him are dogs. There's the excited, social people, and then there's the little bit reserved, kind of introverted
creative types.
Yeah.
Who's your co-host? Because you keep saying we for Nowhere to Nothing. Who's the co-host?
Yeah. So On a regular basis, it's me and my philosophy professor
Oh,
from 17 years ago, Norm Gayford. So
no way.
he's the resident expert. The way that it usually goes is I'm the host. I put that in quotation marks because it's really a conversation. It's a back and forth. But um, I ask the questions, he answers, and then we kind of go back and forth about them. But he's the regular host. We do have guests on, so I've had authors and philosophers and um, AI scientists and all different types on the show. But on a regular basis, it's him and I.
Cool, very cool. Wow, you're so privileged to get to have him around all the time for 17. You've been doing, how long you been doing the podcast?
We've only been doing the podcast 5 years,
Oh,
five and a
okay.
half.
Still, that's pretty good. Pretty good access. Like, I mean, it's you can get to pick his brain and ask him all kinds of questions. I'd love that. I'd love to have access to that. Philosophy is a hobby of mine. That's how I came to monotheism. I was born and raised Protestant, left the faith at age 14, around the age of puberty, and 25 years of atheism, and I got into darker and darker stuff. Ended up being a Satanist, and then hard solipsist, which you know about, and then through reading Rene Descartes of all things, brought me back to God because he talks about hard solipsism in there. But yeah, so philosophy, I'm very, very interested in philosophy, and I hope to dig into that today, and then I hope to have you back in the future so we can keep digging. But we'll see what happens. But you mentioned music. What kind of music do you make?
So I make I call it alternative rock, right?
Okay.
So I play all the instruments. I do all the production and everything like that. Um, I tend to like it's sort of a mixture of kind of 90s rock mixed with psychedelic
Oh,
tones. So
wow.
the project's a little bit all over. I have some, like the most recent album I released is a little bit catchier.
Okay.
But then the piece I released the year before was a 20-minute song, about outer space, right? So
Ah,
there's some progressive elements, there's some
ah,
psychedelic elements, there's some
oh.
mainstream rock elements. So it's all over the map. But
Wow. Yeah, my big thing now and since puberty really is 70s prog rock.
yeah, yeah.
So when you mentioned space rock or whatever, it's like Hawkwind. I'm revisiting Hawkwind now. I'm loving it. And but yeah, there's I was really into Van der Graaf Generator. I recently discovered Gnidderlog, which is an obscure band, but I actually interviewed the 73-year-old guy from the band. Like he's still around. He and his twin brother are still alive, still making music. But yeah, I love progressive rock and I love all kinds of music. I even, of course, the late 60s with the psychedelic stuff. I love that. I was introduced to prog through Pink Floyd, so um,
I have to ask you
yeah,
because I think you'd like them. Have you heard any of Neil Morse?
no, how do you say it?
You have to check out Neil Morse.
Neil Morse. Morse like
Yes. So
Morris?
have you heard of Spock's Beard at
No.
all?
Is this recent
Okay.
stuff? Is this recent stuff?
No, he's been around since the 90s, but he had a progressive rock band, Spock's Beard, that was sort of influenced by 70s Prague.
Okay, cool.
And I got into him through I was listening to what got me into Prague was Dream Theater. So progressive metal in the early
Oh,
2000s.
oh,
And then their drummer Mike Portnoy played with this other guy. And so whereas Dream Theater's more progressive metal, these guys were more progressive rock influenced by the 70s. And then
oh,
Neil Morse converted to Christianity and left the band and started doing some solo projects.
oh,
And it's some of the most epically emotional music you'll ever hear. You will love it.
cool,
I
cool.
guarantee it. Check out
Morris,
One or Question Mark
okay,
or almost anything, but really
cool.
he's excellent.
Yeah, very cool, very cool. And yeah, so I'm excited, but I do a little bit of composition on the computer, very, very sporadically, like I haven't been doing it recently, but I like the idea of experimental music. That's why I like prog from the 70s because there was a lot of freedom and they were just coming out of the sort of the drug era. And so a lot of them were on drugs, but which I don't really, I'm not really a fan of illegal drugs or legal drugs for that matter. But I like the creativity, And
Mhm.
some prog rocker said famously that if you're not creative, acid's really good to make you creative, and if you are creative, making taking acid will make you insane. Like it's it's
Yeah.
you know what I mean. So Sid Barrett, I think Sid Barrett's a good example of that. He took the acid, probably shouldn't have, because he was already creative and sensitive, and pushed him over the edge. But
Yeah, and that's I'm sort of on a similar page. Like I'm already to that point where it's like I don't think I need any help. I like to tell people I like to make music that sounds like I'm on drugs, but I'm not.
have you do you drink coffee or no?
I really try to stay away from it because I'm low key high energy, right? So
Uh-huh.
I'm reserved and I'm kind of an introvert and stuff, but
Yeah.
I'm usually kind of already amped
Are you
up.
a nervous person?
Not really. I'm pretty calm, but
High
yeah, coffee will
metabolism?
put me into that place. I'll get real jittery, real
You're
over the
high
edge. But
metabolism?
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, that sounds like me. So yeah, I really I've dabbled with drugs, as a teenager, as we all do, or most of us do, and it really wasn't that great. But because I'm too sensitive, and too nervous, whatever. But
Mhm.
yeah, music is very special. It's a religious sort of thing. It's a spiritual sort of thing, and it can really transport you. And there are worlds to explore. And so now that I'm Christian, I'm a little bit cautious, of the spirit world or whatever. I want to always try to be on the good side, the good team. You talked about Taoism, and there's almost like that Star Wars kind of idea of the Force, like it's neutral, but it could be used for good or for evil. And you have these opposing forces with the masculine and feminine, the yin and the yang, or whatever. Um, but from the Christian perspective, there's just God who's all good. He's the source of everything that's good, and evil has no substance. It's just a way of falling away from everything that's good. So when I dabble in music, I listen to a lot of music that is, frankly, demonic, but the music's good. Like the music is good. It's good. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
it's an interesting headspace for a relatively new convert to be navigating in a world. And I'm just talking about music now. I could turn on the radio in my truck when I'm driving around at work. I work in a construction company, and it's just a pop tune, and you might think it's cheesy, you might think it's cute or whatever. But for me, it's like I'm very sensitive also to the sexual stuff. So if it's like there's sexual lyrics in a pop tune, you might not notice, or maybe you would, but a lot of people might not notice. But for me, I'm like very aware of that, very sensitive to that. So I feel the spiritual aspect even in that. A cheesy pop tune, which people would just dismiss. For me, it's like almost like an aggressive attack on me. Like awakening lust or whatever. So what do you think about that spiritual aspect of music?
Yeah, I think it's interesting that in the Christian narrative very early on that Satan was in charge of music, right? In heaven, because I think that that's something that even in modern times, um,
He's still in charge.
yeah, you see, yeah, exactly. You see that's you notice how I saw it over and over again in the church that I was in when I was younger, right? I played on the worship team because
Uh,
I played with music, and what you saw is just the cycle. You'd go through people over and over again, and you'd have these worship leaders come and go, and it seemed like there's always this temptation to people who were in charge of the music seem to be under attack
hmm.
more than anybody else in the church, right? They seem to
Yeah.
have the most struggles with trying to stay on track with things. And I don't know if that's just the conception that people have of religious music or what, but it always seemed like playing worship music is never enough for people on the worship team. They have to reach out, and that seems to be when they get themselves in trouble a little bit.
Mm. Yeah, well, it's a powerful thing, music. And how do you explain being agnostic, being sort of non-religious? How do you explain just because you're a psychology student too, right? So how do
Yeah.
you explain the emotional reaction to music? Like I get tears in my eyes listening just to a melody,
Hmm.
much less a human voice. So how do you explain that? And I hope you don't give me some dry Darwinian nonsense about conditioning or
Yeah,
something. Like I hope there's something more to it. There is for me, but I hope there is for you too.
yeah. So you and I think are very similar people, but my mom remembers, she always likes to tell that when I was 4 and 5, anytime she'd play Somewhere Over the Rainbow, I'd start crying, even at that age,
Yeah.
because just that melody, the harmony and the melody of the music was enough to trigger a response like that. And so if you try to remove um, religious or spiritual connotations and you try to look at it from, a reductionist empirical standpoint and say what's going on here, I don't think you're going to have much success, kind of like you're saying. Because it's hard to really deny that there's something beyond that going on. And certainly there are explanations. But I think the beauty of psychology is that there's many different psychological paradigms. So the one that tends to be sort of pushed in the public sphere is evolutionary psychology, Darwinian psychology, which says, okay, well, for any sort of behavior that you can observe, there's an evolutionary explanation for it back in time. And really, that's sort of falling out of favor
Oh,
nowadays,
oh, good.
because there's just a lot of cases where you look and you go, oh, it doesn't hold up. It doesn't make any sense. Um, but with that, what you need to have, but what makes people it unnerves people, is you need the ability to say, we don't know, right? And there's a good chance we might never know. Now, with advancing technological tools, fMRI and different ways of monitoring, brain activity, we can get closer. But the sensitivity of those tools still isn't quite to the point where you can pinpoint and say, well, this is exactly what's happening to know what's going on. And it's to the point where you still have some theories that they're not mainstream in the psychological community, but they're still, not completely rejected, that say some things that sound kind of crazy, right? Like, well, maybe consciousness doesn't originate in the brain. It might be a field that is a fundamental part of the universe, and the brain more acts like a receptor or
Mm.
antenna for it that cues it in, right? That sounds crazy, but there is some scientific and theoretical evidence that can say that sort of thing, or that consciousness is the quantum wave collapse with quantum wave function collapse within microtubules in the brain. These sort of far out things, which to me isn't so much saying that this is the solution, but it's saying we don't know, and trying to give a reductionist empirical explanation for it is a false narrative. I think the people who are doing good science, and this is something that it's important, and I always try to tell whenever I'm on a show, science never proves anything. If somebody tells you the science proves something, they're not a good scientist. Science is a process. So, and what appears to be true today will be modified or replaced tomorrow. Science disproves things. You're always testing the null hypothesis, right? Which is not what you're trying to prove, but you're trying to say, is the thing that already exists wrong? And so science goes around proving lots of things wrong, but it never proves anything conclusively, because there's always the chance in the future you're going to come across new evidence that proves that thing wrong. And we see it over and over again. That was a lot of people's big gripe with COVID, for instance, right? Is that the knowledge on the disease progressed over the course of 2 or 3 years. And so some of the scientific and medical advice contradicted itself, months or years down the road, because they were discovering new things. And what some people want from science is almost a religious dogmatic type faith, where that when a scientist says something, that's facts, that's real, that's the way it is, and that's the way it will always be. Science, good science, never promises to do that, right? So this is a really long roundabout way of answering the question, right? But when we have these sorts of experiences, listening to music that are deeply emotional or appear to be spiritual, I think it would be, sort of vain, pompous, and disingenuous to say that I have a 100% accurate answer for it. But
Yeah, yeah, for sure, for sure. But I like your breadth of possibilities that you outlined there. I should mention I did study science, physics in particular, and I've worked in quantum physics. I actually have my name on a paper, a published peer-reviewed paper in quantum physics. So, and I've also worked in astrophysics at the Canadian Space Agency. So I do have a respect for the natural sciences, but I put them in their proper place. And in the Catholic worldview, we've got God at the top. That's big S science, like he knows everything. And then you've got, of course, theology, philosophy, and then the natural sciences underneath that. And then, of course, you've got other sciences beneath the hard sciences. I studied physics because I thought that, I have a philosophical bent, and I kind of naively thought that we would be exploring ultimate reality when really they're just churning out workers for the industry, different industries, right? So I was a bit naive about that, but it was interesting, and I got to have hands-on experience, like I said, working in interesting fields. And the thing about quantum science is it's pimped out as there's a lot of bad philosophy surrounding the hard science of quantum physics, and it is a hard science. I mean, there's no magic, there's no mystery to it. Like there's cause and effect, and those modern day scientists who want to sell books, they say, well, I'm not sure about causality because of this and that. And Einstein famously said, God does not play dice. They're different schools. You've heard about the Schrodinger, uh, the Copenhagen interpretation, and the alternate schools. And it's the philosophical packaging of the hard science that's really controversial. The hard science itself, you have a result, it's repeatable, it's a pretty dry fact. It's the packaging, it's that philosophical couching, and people come with bias. I have a
yeah,
bias. I have a bias now. It's different from my bias before my conversion. My bias now is I see God everywhere, and I want to put God at the center of everything. Before I didn't. So we come with biases, and it's the same thing with the scientific community. And so when it comes to the quantum stuff, there's a lot of hype, and there's a lot of stuff and nonsense that's always packaged in with that, which I can see through most of it. But a lot of people can't. They just get excited. They think it's weird and wonderful. And
yeah,
nature is complex, and it is wonderful. But we shouldn't be naive, and we shouldn't, especially if we're atheist. You're not an atheist, but or, well, you're a de facto atheist. But the hardcore anti-God atheist, they make science into a religion. It's scientism, and so I'm sure you've probably discussed this already on your podcast.
yeah, and that's the big downfall, right? Is this if you're putting that kind of faith in science, you're really no different than a religious person in a lot of ways. A good book about that addresses this in some ways is Existential Physics by Sabine Hassenfelder, where that's like the thing that she rails against very early on is that she's a physicist, and she says the biggest problem with modern physics is physicists trying to impose their philosophy through their work, right?
Ah,
Trying to explain things that
yeah,
physics was not cut out to explain
yeah,
by couching things in certain terms, or inventing new particles that fit a theory that we have no experimental evidence exist, right? And that is in many ways bad science. That's not really what it's about.
absolutely. I mean, a lot of people think I'm insane because I'm Catholic. But especially, I think I'm especially insane because I'm a young Earth creationist. I believe the whole universe is like 7,225 years old or something like that. And the thing is, like I said, I do respect the natural sciences, and I recognize the limitations that are on the natural sciences. And if you show me a mountain of evidence like fossils and geological record or whatever, that's fine. I'm gonna look at the evidence, and I'm gonna interpret it according to my worldview. Because like I said, in the hierarchy of the sciences, I've got God, theology, philosophy, and the natural science explanations are good as far as they go. But I know that they have their proper place and they have their limitations. And I have higher sciences that I can draw on, like the principle of causality I mentioned. I'm never going to budge on that. The principle of sufficient reason, I'm never going to budge on that. The principle of proportionate causality, you can't give what you don't have. I'm never going to budge on that. The laws of thought, the law of non-contradiction, the law of the excluded middle, and so on and so forth. These things are non-negotiable. They're self-evident. They're axiomatic. So a lot of people online in the religious debate, about God, questions about God, and these sorts of things, they gloss over all of that, and they don't understand that the sciences, the hard sciences that they love, are founded on philosophy, right? So can you comment on that?
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, it's very much what you're saying. When I said earlier that I was necessarily agnostic, the reason for that is because if you examine all of the evidence, right, you can never rule out God. And you were mentioning that Descartes is what kind of led you there. It's very much, I lots of people use the natural sciences to try to disprove religious theories. But here's the thing, right? Let's say God planted dinosaur bones or stretched starlight from billions of years away to reach it here. Now, he could do all that if he is an omni type being, right? He could do all of that stuff. I don't think that sort of action would jive with an all loving paradigm, right? Because then you have a trickster God essentially, right? Like he's tricking people into putting faith in him by presenting them with evidence to their senses that deceives them. So I'm not saying that's what you believe or what anybody believes, but I'm just saying the point is that you can never say God doesn't exist, right? Because if there is our sort of stereotypical monotheistic view of God as being an all-powerful being out there, he can do anything. So all of this could be here. All of it could be here through evolution over the course of 14 billion years. All of it could be here in 6,000 years, the way that it's spelled out in the Bible. Either one is possible if God exists and he has the power that is stated there. So to be atheist, to just say, nah, he doesn't exist, you go, well, and especially if you're putting all of your eggs in the science basket, right? And saying, oh yeah, well, we know there was a Big Bang 14 billion years ago, and that there's no reason to have any cause for it. We have no idea if that's true. And the James Webb Space Telescope is presenting evidence all the time that doesn't necessarily contradict or refute the Big Bang hypothesis, but it certainly is throwing monkey wrenches and question marks into everything. And that's what we always find with science and philosophy is anytime you go to answer a question, you get 10 more, right? You never get answers. You only get more questions. And so anybody who, if you believe you have answers in a religious framework, I'm never going to fault anybody for those because metaphysical questions are necessarily beyond what we have evidence to support or refute. It's unfalsifiable in a way. But if you're somebody who wants to throw all of your eggs into the imperial reductionist basket and say that you have the answers, I'm gonna debate you on that, right? Because we don't have that kind of evidence. We don't have that kind of knowledge. And really, especially in the event of the Big Bang paradigm, if you had a steady state universe, or it'd be a lot easier to be an atheist. But the fact that there's a Big Bang, and even if you come up with this, string theory or M theory and all these things, and you say, well, no, there didn't need to be a God or a cause. We have these brains that kind of sparked everything into existence. That's totally possible. Could be. I don't know. But it could just as likely be that as God creating it. It's a metaphysical question. It's unfalsifiable. It's beyond our ability to say yes or no. But I think that what the big takeaway is that humans don't like that uncertainty. And I think I might be a little weird in the aspect that I do. Like I love the mystery. I don't want to have all of the answers because then I think that life loses something that makes it special. I love the fact that the cosmological origins of the universe are so mysterious and so weird that we couldn't possibly think up anything stranger. All right. And we can never answer them. To me, that's fascinating and cool.
I got hung up on by Matt Dillahunty when I called into the Atheist Experience a few years ago, when I started talking about mystery, because I wanted to just talk to him about the uncaused first cause, and he just started bringing in all the faith-based stuff, and I said I don't want to talk about that. I want to talk about philosophy and the uncaused first cause. But he kept bringing in my Catholic stuff, and so he kept pressing me on all this Catholic faith-based stuff, which is fine, but I don't want to talk about faith-based stuff with an atheist. Why would I? It's like,
Right.
well, let's start with the stuff we can agree on. So anyway, he ended up hanging up on me because I started talking about the mystery, the mysteries in our faith. There are many mysteries in our faith, like we cannot understand the Trinity. We're never gonna understand it in all eternity. We're gonna enter into the life of the Trinity, hopefully, those of us who make it to heaven. But it's a mystery, and I consider each human being a mystery because there's that freedom of the will. And this is an interesting topic to discuss with anyone, a believer or a non-believer, but especially an agnostic like you. Do you believe in free will? And I have a feeling you might just be relying on the mystery here, but if you do believe in free will, how do you account for it, if at all? And you're probably comfortable not accounting for it, but if you don't believe in free will, maybe just talk about that too.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm a kind of a frustrating interviewee, right? Because you ask these questions, then I sort of wiggle my way
It's
around them
okay.
and say
It's
that I
okay.
don't really know. I don't know. But
Short answer,
no,
don't
I
know.
think that
Okay.
yeah, we've been talking about it a lot on the show recently, and I think what it comes down to, as best I can tell, is that there's almost a relativistic thing going on with it, right? Where based upon the scientific evidence that we do have, and that how we think the universe unfolded and how we think things are progressing, it sure appears that there's some type of deterministic bend to it. But at the same time, um, I think that on an individual level, we have not the illusion of free will. I think that we do have the ability to make choices, um, but it's almost like an observer effect in like a double slit type experiment, right? Because of what we're doing, um, it almost appears as if the arrow of time isn't set in straight into the future. I think that we have the ability to make decisions um, in the moment, but at the same time, if we were to look back from the end of the universe at what happened, we'd almost say that we couldn't have made any other decisions, right? It's a strange thing. I don't have it all figured out. I don't pretend that I do. Um, but it's definitely something that it's difficult to account for.
Let's imagine there's like a pathway, like a ramp or a track or a road that's made out of some kind of metal that's pliable, and there's a big boulder that's bouncing down this rampish type thing, this road that's suspended in the air somehow. And as it bounces, it's reshaping the metal, and so it'll twist a little bit this way and send the road going this way, and then go a little bit different directions based on how this boulder bounces down. So this is your conception of free will, where we are affecting the future just by in the moment by the actions that we're taking, but those actions, in the empirical level, when we analyze them or examine them under the microscope or whatever in the laboratory, we're going to see that everything makes sense, and there is a principle of causality that's being universally applied, and there's no violation of that. But there is also a cause and effect on a personal level in that way, where we are shaping the future. Does that sound like a fair representation of what you're trying to say?
Yeah, that's probably a pretty good illustration. You know, and again, it might not be completely accurate.
That's
These
your
are all
hunch.
things.
It's a hunch you have that that's kind of
Yeah,
what might be
yeah,
going on. Um, yeah, so like without free will, like the problem really is morality, right? Like there can be no blame, no praise, no blame if we don't really have the freedom of the will. So I think it's self-evident, that we are moral beings, that we do have responsibilities, and that we do have culpability for mistakes that we make and outright crimes that we commit, or sins or whatever you want to call them, like these different things we do which are not good. And I do them, you do them, we all do them, whether it's jaywalking or whatever. But and we have responsibility. We also praise people. Some of our praise is misguided. Like I always wonder why we praise a beautiful woman. It's like she's beautiful. It's like it's not her fault. It's not her fault. She's beautiful. She's just lucky. But I guess on the other hand, you could take two twins, like two beautiful girls, and they grow up. One takes care of herself, the other doesn't. I mean, I guess there's praise due to the one that took care of herself, right? Would you say?
Yeah, yeah. And this is where psychology gets a little bit interesting because, the paradigm that sort of dominated the late 20th century was behaviorism, which
Mm.
is this sort of view that there is no internal states of humans, right? If you have a stimulus, there will be a response that's determined by the environment. And they did a lot of studies on twins, just like you were saying, twins that were identical, so they shared the DNA, that were separated at birth, and how they grew up and what sort of traits they shared and that sort of stuff. And it's interesting what the results of that time period were, because a lot of the things that are firm scientific facts about psychology that have persisted throughout time are part of the behavior school. So it had very important things to teach us about human behavior, but at the same time, the sort of platform on which it operated was bunk, and they kind of demonstrated that throughout time as cognitive psychology and some of these other paradigms came to replace it or critique it. So and I think that it seems intuitive to people at every level, right? I don't want to believe that all I am is responses based off of my genes or my evolution to what's happening in my environment, right? I want to believe that I have some sort of agency in the world, and they've demonstrated that that's true, because you can put people in different situations and they have vastly different responses to the same situation, or in completely different situations they'll have similar responses. And so behaviorism was largely the way that it sort of gave itself authority was by putting together results in very controlled situations. So only in the laboratory. Well, in the laboratory, look, the monkey and the human and the pigeon all have the same response. Well, that's one thing if you're in a sterile laboratory. If you put them out in the world, those response curves completely change. There's too many variables. There's too many things going on, and the subjects are completely different. And we can see that in everyday life, right? So, I have there's many parts of my life that are really structured. There's many parts that are very free and liberal and stuff. And me and my brother and my sister, we grew up in the same house. We had the same parents. Everything was the same. And we grew up to be different people, right? In some ways, and similar people in other ways. So the thought that there's agency, right? And the thought that people should be held responsible for the bad things they do and should be, praised for the good things that they do or whatever. I think that we all believe that holds weight, right? It seems, because I've heard these philosophical arguments, right? That, oh, well, if everything's determined, then we can't hold people responsible for the things that they do. No, people are still making decisions, right? So that's where I think it gets tricky, where, you go, well, if things are deterministic, or if, things started from initial state, and if you just knew all of the parameters, you could predict how the entire universe would unfold. Well, we know that I think that's not quite true. I think that we can get a lot of general patterns out of that, but I think that we have, especially, and you could probably speak to this better than I could, right? But on a quantum level, right? There's no predicting things, even an electron, right? You don't know where it is. You just have a probability about where it
Yeah,
is.
yeah. I should interject here because I've got maybe unpopular views when it comes to the interpretation of quantum physics. I believe that it is deterministic, and I believe that there are, because I when I examine the wave function curve, and choose the simplest one. It looks like a bell curve, right? That's the simplest one to analyze, and we just do a series of repeating the same experiment, shooting electron whatever, and it always fulfills that same wave function every time reliably. Now, the claim is that because we can't predict the individual electron, for example, then there's some underdeterminacy or some indeterminacy there. And I just think it's self-evident that the fact that it fills out the wave function perfectly every time, given enough samples, proves that if we were to step backwards in time, we would see one little notch for the last electron, a second little notch where the second to last penultimate electron went, and third to last, fourth to last. And we know exactly where each electron has to go. It's determined. It can't go anywhere else because it fulfills this curve every time. So this is the misunderstanding of the statistical sciences, I think. And it's the same thing with the weather. Why can't we predict the weather? Because it's complex. But in retrospect, it's a different picture, right? If we step backwards and we look at what happened, it makes sense. It all makes sense. The same thing with the quantum world. So this is not a popular opinion that I hold. It's an unpopular opinion, but it's sort of like akin to what Einstein was saying about God doesn't play dice. And that's just sort of a side note. I wanted to talk more on the psychological side with you about the way that trauma or a crisis or some big change can be cathartic, or it could be a catalyst in a person's life psychologically, and how things can get revealed. There's a stereotype, and I don't know if you've traveled with your wife or not, but there's a stereo I have. I went on my honeymoon for a 2-year honeymoon trip around Europe with no money in our pockets, so it was quite a catalyst experience challenge. And the stereotype is that if you travel, you'll figure out if you're compatible, and you'll get a few bumps on the road, and you'll know if you can work things out. And I think it's sage advice, if you get to know your future partner, or even a friendship for that matter, or even a family member, to be challenged in that way. So when it comes to COVID, because you mentioned it, a lot of people took sides. A lot of people were sort of crystallized into revealing things about themselves that they didn't actually realize were in there. In the case of my wife, she went from a de facto liberal, just because we're all Canadian, everyone by default is liberal, to pretty hardcore right wing now. Like, she's like very right wing because of COVID. And so I find that interesting. I don't think that the right wing is better than the left wing. I think that the center is Christ, and that's where I'm at. But nonetheless, I did have several reactions to, for example, the jab when it was proposed. And I'm going to recount this to you just so that as an example, and then you can talk about the general idea. But my reaction to the proposed solution was, well, first of all, I have free will, and I'm going to say no just as an exercise of my free will. The second thing is, I don't believe in a monolithic consensus in any science, much less in the medical sciences. So that's another strike against it. And I'm also cautious and skeptical. So I'm just going to wait 50 years and see what the historians say about it, and then I'll make my judgment, because it's too soon to say. And the other thing, the fourth thing, is that I know that the flu, they've been trying to make a flu vaccine for forever, and it's a constantly changing thing. You can't. It's a moving target. I already knew that. And I guess the fifth thing is, I went and read what Pfizer promised, and all they promised was to reduce some of these annoying symptoms like snuffy nose or whatever. It's like, I could just drink water and get plenty of rest for those symptoms. I don't need an experimental mRNA to reduce these symptoms. I'm sorry, if that's what you're offering, it's not good. And they themselves have it's come out recently that they themselves had admitted that they had no promises. They made no promises about any that it's safe or that it's effective. No promises whatsoever. So I'm conservative in that way. But my point here is not to talk about COVID and the jab. My point here is to talk about the psychology of discovering who you are through challenge or through crisis. Can you just talk about that and maybe talk about your friends or yourself? What did you discover because of COVID? Because it was an interesting time.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that a lot of people went through very similar journeys with it, right? I think that in many ways it's unfortunate. No matter which way you went, whether you went right or left, I think the fact that we went right and left is unfortunate. And especially here in America.
Yeah, which state are you in?
I'm in New York. So,
you're not far
but New
from me.
York is an
I'm
interesting
in
state,
Montreal,
right?
right? I'm in Montreal. You're right across.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So New York's an interesting state, right? Everybody thinks it's the city, but the city's a very small part of it. And so the city's very liberal. Where I live is very conservative, which is more upstate. But yeah, I think that there's trauma responses tend to cause us to want to seek comfort in something that seems familiar and seems stable. And so especially, COVID was just a master class in that, right? You have this thing that destabilizes the entire world, right? And in retrospect, we look at it and we go, well, was it necessary that it did that? Was it necessary that it had that effect on the world? And again, we're if that's not what you want to talk about, then I don't want to go on.
No, we could talk about it. We could talk about it. I did lose my. I got booted off YouTube a couple times for talking about it, but we'll risk it. I think it's calmed down a bit now. The censorship has calmed down a bit now, so we can talk about it.
So again, philosophy is about talking about all issues, right?
Yeah.
And especially the ones that they're going to ban you for. If they're going to try to ban a book that you wrote, or they're going to try to ban
you're over the
YouTube.
target.
Yeah, you're going to try to ban a YouTube episode that you did. Then philosophy's happening there, right? And so, much like you, I tend to be in the middle about things. I think there's, I don't think of myself as one political entity, right? No. It's issue to issue. There's some issues where I'm very conservative. There's some issues where I'm very liberal, and there's some where I'm in the middle, right? Yeah. That's just critical thinking, right? Looking at the specific thing and trying to determine something for yourself. But that was the deleterious effect of COVID, was to remove that, right? When you have something that destabilizes your entire frame of reference, then what happens is people start looking for an authority that will give them some guidance on reestablishing that frame of reference, reestablishing an authority in the sort of vacuum that's left of their normal lives, right? And we've seen it happen to a lot of people, right? That people that used to seem normal to us, whatever normal was to you, now seem crazy because they're either far right or far left or whatever. So yeah, I mean, that's sort of in the nutshell what the trauma response is you have something happen in your life, and then your past experiences, your experience of that trauma, the resources that you have at your disposal, the individuals that surround you and what their viewpoints are, your tribe, right? All of those things sort of play into how you react to that wound, how you heal the wound of that trauma. And so, I was real lucky here to not be personally affected by it as much for a number of reasons, right? That I mentioned earlier. I'm an introvert, right? So being stuck at home wasn't so bad. I got a lot of hobbies, like there's a lot of things about it that didn't harm me so much. Whereas a lot of other people, it did harm a lot. I tend to be, pretty down the middle on things. And when it came to, the vaccine and public policy, I was happy to follow the science where it went, but I was also happy to sit back and not be a guinea pig for things, right? I was happy to see how it played out for other people first, before making decisions. But yeah, it's trauma. It can have it can it's kind of like grafting a plant, right? If you were trying to prune a plant, some injuries that you make will kill it, and some injuries you make will create new growth. Um, and the same injury to different plants can have vastly different effects. Humans aren't really any different. It depends on what the injury is and who the person is and what the resources they have to cope with it are.
Yeah, well, one Protestant pastor I listened to on the radio, he said, I forget what the context was for his comment, but it was just a general comment that when you go through stuff, it can make you bitter or it can make you better. So it's kind of up to you, if you think about that, like, okay, like I can react this way or that way. And so it comes back again to the free will, and which I firmly believe in. But even if you're a compatibilist, as it seems like you are, it's basically the same thing. Like you make a choice, right? So yeah, get better or get bitter, and there's so many frustrations in life anyway without a global psyop or whatever it was, that it's challenging enough just navigating a marriage, much less something that's really big and outside of your control, and just frankly annoying. Like, I don't like wearing masks, I don't want to wear a mask, and just like I said, there's so many little aggravating things anyway in life. Like, for example, having to work. Like, I don't like having to work, but I'm like you. I'd rather just be at home. I have one friend, a good friend, agnostic. I interviewed him, and he loved, being told he had to work from home and all that stuff. He loved it, just because he's at
Yeah,
home with his cats and it's cozy.
yeah, and that's where I think psychology and philosophy sort of converge for everybody, and I think it's where it helps to live an examined life and to kind of be able to meta cognate about some of these things is um, like with masks, right? I was in the military, so I remember in Wisconsin in February riding in the back of an open pickup truck at 40 miles an hour when it's negative 40 degrees, wearing the mask over my face and having my arms freeze up to my forearms, and remembering back to that during COVID and going, wearing a mask isn't so bad. Or, being stuck at home and thinking about, I think there's a lot of perspective in things that we can lose. I think that, and always considering the other options. It's not a way of, getting out of, being mistreated or trying to, wuss out of standing up for yourself, that sort of thing. But I think there are some things in modern life where we go, man, if you think back to how things were 100 years ago or how things in your own life were at a different point, sometimes it can give you the strength to go, what, this isn't that bad. And I think we all needed a little bit of that during COVID because we all had different challenges. But
Yeah, when you think about, you studied philosophy and psychology, so you've got a firm grip on probably a lot of different principles that guide decision making in people generally, and in your own life, you've come to forge a character based on principles that you've taken from your parents or from other loved ones, and just from trial and error, right? So how would you? It's not easy. It's really a hard question, but how would you sort of pick your top three principles that you are sort of not willing to compromise on ever, ever, ever? What would those principles be? I know it's a tough question, but just take a stab at it.
yeah. Hmm. Um, yeah, man, I don't know. I think that I'm always trying to re-examine um, different aspects of my life at different times, and I think the if there's any principle that I stand by, it would be not standing
Flexibility,
by principles.
flexibility,
Yes, it's
adaptability, flexibility,
yeah,
open-mindedness, open-mindedness.
yeah, I don't ever want to be at a point where I would reject something without examining it, right? And so and part of that is discussing things with people who have different beliefs than you, right? There's I think that's something that we need to do more of. We need to have experiences and conversations with people who believe things that are different than us. But more importantly than that, we need to be able to accept when the things that they have to say are right, and then what we think is wrong. But there's a principle in psychology called cognitive dissonance, right?
Yeah.
Which is this effect that they've studied extensively, where in light of evidence that contradicts what somebody already believes, rather than accept the new evidence, they will reject it out of hand and continue to believe what they believe, even if it's essentially proven wrong. And in a lot of cases will even strengthen those beliefs.
Doubling down, yeah, doubling down.
Yeah. And so if you kind of look at how geopolitics have proceeded over the past few years, you see that we have that in spades, and that's kind of the root of a lot of our problems. So, I think that flexibility and open-mindedness is an attribute of humility, of being humble. That doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if you have a PhD or if you're a doctor or if you did this, that, or the other thing. You can always be wrong about anything, right? And that's what I was talking about with science earlier. No good scientist is going to tell you that they've proved something, right? Because they can't. They can't honestly, genuinely tell you that they've proved something or that they know something. All they can do is say, I have evidence that supports this theory. Full stop. That's it,
As you were speaking, I was thinking about a good example about, rigid thinking versus flexible thinking. And I'm in a situation, okay, I talk about this more than I should on my podcast because my wife doesn't like me to talk about her, but, she hates Pope Francis. She hates Pope Francis. She hates the Catholic Church, and she hates Pope Francis in particular. She thinks he's literally a demon. But, you know, I I'm Catholic, and so I have certain beliefs, okay? And there's a good reason why I'm telling you this. I'll get your reaction to it. I believe that Pope Francis is, appointed by God. He's the vicar of Christ. He's the visible head of the visible church here on earth, and the invisible head, of course, is Jesus Christ, who's up in heaven. The reason I'm telling you this is because I know I'm not stupid. I can read the headlines. I know that the conservative Catholics, they hate Pope Francis. They think he's the Antichrist. They think he's a homosexual. They think he's a communist, socialist, whatever. And I'm exaggerating, but just a little bit. Okay. And so I'm not stupid. I know, first of all, I know that Pope Francis is a man, and so he's imperfect. And I disagree with him on a couple of issues, and that's just normal. That's just normal. You and I disagree, but I love and respect you. Okay? Same thing with Pope Francis. And he's my elder, so I have to have even more respect for him because he's an old man. And he's a Christian, and I can't hate this old man who's a Christian. I just can't. Okay? But even if the worst case scenario, even if the stories are true that they're telling me, that the so-called conservative Catholics, even if it's true, I'm still going to defend him. I'm still going to defend him, give it the benefit of the doubt. And I'll wait and see when it's proven that, yeah, he was an anti-pope and he's the Antichrist or whatever. Great. Okay? But for now, my church that I belong to tells me, when I ask who's the pope today, they say it's Pope Francis. So until history catches up with this infiltrator who snuck in and he's the Antichrist or whatever, until that time, I'm giving him maximum benefit of the doubt. So the reason I'm telling you all of this is because I'm not stupid. My wife thinks I'm stupid. Why? How can you believe in this guy? He's a demon. He's this and he's that. I said, look, I'm giving him the benefit of the doubt, and maybe you're right. But, so I hope you'll agree that I'm open-minded, I'm flexible, I'm willing to change my mind. Just not yet. It's the same thing with the COVID jab. It's like, I'll just wait 50 years to see what happened, and where was the corruption, where was the money going, and where was good science, where was bad science. Same thing with Pope Francis. Like, maybe he's good, maybe he's bad, but I have to give him the benefit of the doubt that he's good. So I just wanted you to sort of give me your assessment, like in terms of rigidity. Like, yeah, I'm rigid. I'm Catholic. I believe what I believe, but I'm also open-minded. So is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, I think that I think that it's very interesting, right? Because rigidity can go both ways, right? I think that we have people who, um, you know, from a certain perspective, somebody might view your wife as rigid, right?
Uh,
Listen, you're not giving this guy a chance. You're saying all these terrible things about him, and we, really, we don't know what his perspective is. And there's other people that might say you're rigid. Well, he's proven enough that he isn't
right,
following
right.
this, and you're just not willing to see all the terrible things he's doing, right? So I can't remember who said it, and I wish that I could, but there was a philosopher who said, a vice is not the opposite of a virtue. A vice is a virtue in excess, right?
Uh,
So it's not as if um, being loyal is good and being unloyal is bad. It's being loyal is good, but not being loyal or being too loyal are bad. So it's that moderation, right? It's finding
mm,
the ground in the middle,
yeah,
that best reflects the reality of the situation.
yeah,
So I think that it's obviously a hard line to toe. Otherwise, there wouldn't be so many people in the world that we consider to be crazy, right? But that's sort of the critique of, you know, it, it's easy to look at the Nazis during World War II, the concentration camp guards, and say, oh, well, they were animals, right? No, they were human beings like you and me who thought that they were making rational decisions. But look at how far it took them. And but that doesn't change the fact that they were human beings, right? They had all of the same faculties that we had, but because of the situation that they were in, and the social political climate and their prior experiences and the sort of doctrines that they were exposed to, it led them down this darker path, right? So I think that rigidity, right? If you look at it, well, what is the correct amount of rigid to be? That there's a Chinese proverb, right? That when an oak is stronger than bamboo, but when a strong wind comes, the oak breaks and the bamboo bends, right? So you know, that's one way of looking at it. But also, if you're trying to build a house, would you want to build it out of bamboo? Probably not. So I, I guess what I'm trying to say is virtues and vices and rigidity and flexibility are situation dependent. They're context dependent. So trying to give overarching high level value to some of these abstractions is sort of difficult, because what the proper amount to be isn't necessarily a reflection of total character as how you react to certain situations, if that makes sense.
yeah. I want to thank you for that. I wanted to also mention a principle that I use in tricky real life situations when it comes to my worldview and my basic fundamental beliefs about ultimate reality. Um, and this is the conditional, okay? So you can make a conditional statement. If this, then that. And if not this, then the other thing or whatever. And I think it's a very, very powerful antidote to fanaticism. It's a powerful antidote to a bad kind of rigidity. And it's what I use with my Christianity. It's like I admit that I might be wrong because it's a faith-based thing. It's a leap of faith that I took into Christianity, and it might be wrong. I don't think it's wrong. If I thought it were wrong, I wouldn't be Christian, right? Like, I mean, I took the leap of faith precisely because I thought it warranted credibility, and I continue to look into its credibility, and I continue to speak with non-Christians and anti-Christians and whatever, and it's a good exercise. And I love the truth, and I'll follow the truth no matter where it leads me. And right now I'm on my journey. My pursuit of truth has led me here. You love truth. Your journey is leading you to different pathways and whatever. And I'm not a relativist. I'm not a subjectivist. I believe that there is an absolute, objective, eternal, and unchanging truth by which we can judge and the good and the true and so on and so forth. But I also know that it's really messy here below in this world, and we're going to make mistakes, and we're trying to follow the truth as best we can, given the lights that we have. But this use of the conditional, I think, is very, very important, and it is humbling, to say, that you might be wrong. And but the foundation for me as a monotheist is the uncaused first cause. Like it's a philosophical fact. You could do a reduction to absurdity proof test to show that there is one and only one uncaused first cause, and you can actually use philosophy to show some of the attributes, the pure perfections of this uncaused first cause. And Blessed John Duns Scotus is a good one to look into if you're interested in these questions. Okay, but St. Thomas Aquinas does a good job too in his own way, although it's not quite as profound because he uses sort of a priori argumentation as opposed to the a posteriori argumentation of Blessed John Duns Scotus. So all of this to say that that one word if, it is liberating and it is freeing, and I think you and I are kindred spirits in that way in terms of being open and being humble, and just a little insertion of the word if this then that. I think it's a powerful thing, and it's also in terms of Eastern diplomacy, like in China, they try to walk away from the negotiating table always feeling like they made the losing party not feel like losers. This is what someone told me. It's a cultural difference where they don't want to rub your face in it like, I got victory over you at the negotiating table. No, they want to make it seem like it's equitable and fair and everyone is a winner. And so it's the same thing with intellectual discussions or philosophical discussions or religious discussions or political discussions. We can have common ground and we can emphasize the common ground. And there's a little bit of compromise when we just throw in a little bit of a weakness on our own side, like, yeah, I could be wrong, or if this, then that, but if not that, then whatever.
Yeah,
So
exactly. What you said right there is something that I think that a lot of people in organized institutional religions would say that you're not a Christian because you admit to not knowing that you're right? That you need to take faith to that level in order to even be a Christian, right? And I think that that's part of the problem with some of those viewpoints, right? Is that
it might be insecurity.
it's
It might just be human insecurity on their part. I
yeah,
haven't I
yeah.
haven't I haven't encountered that, but I don't know a lot of Christians. Like, I mean, the only ones I know are through the podcast. That basically in my real life, it's all just liberal agnostics. So, but continue, yeah.
Yeah. No, I think you're absolutely right. It's non-zero sumness, right? Which is if everybody claims that they have the answer and nobody's willing to budge, then life as a whole, whether it's political or religious discourse, becomes competitive, right? And anytime it becomes competitive, you have to have a winner. And anytime you have to have a winner, things are going to progress to a violent conclusion, essentially. But if you have, a non-zero sum game, right, where I'm willing to say that I may be wrong and you're willing to say that you may be wrong, well, now that opens up an avenue for us to have a discussion. Maybe neither one of us changes our mind about anything, but most likely we will. Maybe not on the big things, but certainly you're going to say some things that are going to make me go, if I'm open-minded enough to say that I don't know, and you present me with some information, I can go, well, maybe that's an opportunity, right? And that's how progress is made here, right? If you don't have at least that, you're not going to have a political or a religious progress. You're just going to have a war.
Yeah, absolutely. It is embarrassing, looking at the failings, I would say, of members of the Christian community over the course of its history. It is embarrassing, and I'm still trying to sort out things, historical events like the the efforts of the church to come over to the New World here in America, and I hear different stories from different people. Like, different books will give different angle on the treatment of the native people here, and the Catholic books I'm reading give a very good praise to the church. Like, they did wonderful stuff, and the natives welcomed them with open arms, and it was all rosy and nice. And then the typical secular atheist, secular liberal media gives a complete opposite picture. So I'm not losing sleep over it, but I am curious. I am curious. I'm cheering always for the good and the true and the beautiful. And it's a bit disappointing, if you hear stories like we heard stories about here in Canada about all the the children that were tortured and killed out at the residential schools. Did you hear about that?
No.
2 years. So they burnt down a bunch of churches in protest. The secular anti-Christians burnt down a bunch of churches. 80 churches were burned. And 2 years later, it was quietly announced that they weren't dead bodies that were found underground by the sonar. It was actually just rocks and tree stumps and whatever, roots of trees. So it actually was fake news. But those 80 churches were burned nonetheless, right? So there's a power that comes with any whiff of corruption, whether it's real or imagined or whatever. And there's a lot of power to be harnessed in true news, real news, and in fake news. And sadly, people take advantage of that because they get clicks, they get money, lifestyle, whatever. I don't know. It seems like a cheap way to get ahead, right? Like,
Yeah, I certainly there's been a lot of philosophers who have said that reality is much less about reality than what we believe about reality, right? What we believe has much greater effects on our actions than what is actually out there, and that goes both ways for everybody, so that's why it's critically important for us to examine what we believe and to put it in a proper context. We're never going to be objective. We're never going to have a way of eliminating our biases or eliminating our blind spots, but we need to do the best that we can. We can't just blindly accept things that we're told, no matter who it's from or what side or who we think our authority figures are in those cases.
before I let you go here, and thank you for your time, hope you come back. What were some of your favorite philosophers, just quickly and briefly, particularly around, pre-Socratics and then the Golden Age with Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle, and then, the skeptical movement, the skeptics and the Stoics, and just limiting it to that sort of time period. Who stands out for you, some of your favorites?
Yeah. I think that as far as, if you go back to the Greeks, you kind of have the big three, or what's really kind of the big two between Aristotle and Plato, with Socrates sort of thrown in there. The idealism versus Aristotelianism kind of thing. And if I'm being honest, I kind of bend more towards Plato than Aristotle, which I think would be sort of surprising to some people. But Platonic idealism, for all of its flaws, tends to appeal to me a little bit. But the Stoic, I'm a fan of Epictetus, which he's not one of the big Stoic philosophers, but a lot of his writings tend to appeal to me in some ways. And then later on, as you go down the road, Immanuel Kant, I always had a lot of respect for.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just there's a smattering. I think that it's much like what the rest of our conversation has been, which is that you look at each one and you don't wholly subscribe to anybody's philosophy, but you pick and choose the parts that appeal to you, and then you sort of integrate it with other aspects of somebody else's philosophy and see where they're compatible and where they're not. And you do some thinking for yourself, and you kind of come up with some of your own worldviews that are open to malleable change in the future. But the one that, an area that always gets me with that is moral philosophy, right? Because there's been a lot of philosophers who have set out to establish a moral philosophy, and you can always come up with some thought experiment that foils them, right?
Yeah.
Whether it's Bentham or whoever, and you go, oh, okay, well, if you have utilitarianism, then, well, if 80,000 people think that two guys killing each other is the greatest good for the greatest amount, is that moral? Well, absolutely not, and that's sort of the struggle with moral philosophy. And I would love to come back on another time, or even if it's not on the air, I'd like to talk to you, because I had a 3-hour discussion. I don't know much about Catholicism. I was raised Protestant, and I was never really exposed much to Catholicism, but I did have a 3-hour talk with a guy one time about the problem of evil, and I didn't really get a satisfactory response. So I would like to talk about that sometime.
Let's do it on a live stream.
On the air if you don't
no,
want
let's do it. Yeah, let's do it on a live stream. That would be fun. Yeah, I've got the Catholic answers for that, and I believe them. I'm not just regurgitating, like I've thought about it and I do believe it. So yeah, let's definitely do that. And it's been a pleasure meeting you. You're like a kindred spirit, you know.
Yeah.
And I'm sure your wife's probably not interested in coming to talk to me, but invite her anyway. And really,
Okay.
who I'd really like to talk to is your partner in crime there, the professor. If you want to ask him if he'd shoot me an email if he's interested. No pressure, but I always do this. I'm always networking, like asking guests to invite their spouse or whatever. There's this one kid I interviewed. I asked him to invite his basketball coach on. So, whoever, I'll talk to anybody. But I mean, definitely, if your professor is into philosophy, I'm sure he has a lot to say, and I'm sure he's got a lot of opinions. And I'm curious if you two ever got a little bit heated because you really strongly disagreed with each other. Did that ever happen?
Yeah. So no. Um, but I
You
think that
defer to his wisdom, or what?
no, I don't think that's quite it either. He's much more liberal than I am.
Ah,
And so we have views that oppose on a lot of things. But I'm also he's a little bit more he has a tendency to get a little bit more heated, but I'm kind of a cool cucumber. You'll never see
uh,
me.
so
Like I said, my wife and I have known her for 2 decades. She's like, I can remember one time that you yelled, and that was it. So it's like it takes quite a bit for me to get angry. In most cases, if you say something I don't believe, I'll just I'm just going to think about it. Well, I don't believe that, but the stronger initial emotional reaction I have, the more likely I am to want to examine it rather than want to just debate it off the cuff.
right,
So
right, right.
he'll say some things that I won't agree with, but I'm generally not somebody who in the moment is going to engage in a heated argument. I'm more likely to take it back and consider it. But
Well, you do have a Franco-Germanic name, so maybe it's that German blood. Is that your heritage?
yeah, yeah. So yeah, my mom is German, Nonengard, right? And then my dad was French, Bouchard. So if I'm ever up in your neck of the woods, people always try to speak French to me, but I don't speak any French.
Ah, that's hilarious. So I know I always ask my guests to pray for me, but so you're not going to pray for me because you don't really pray. But you can send me some good vibes or whatever. You can use your Taoist, whatever they do, and we're human, so we have a connection, and you could just wish me well, right? And
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
I'll be wishing you well in my Catholic way. But I'm excited to come back and do part two with you. But we'll discuss that during email. We'll email back and forth. We'll figure out a thing. And because I'm on Podmatch now, my calendar is like full until Christmas, and it's just amazing. Like I don't have to go
Yeah, it's a great
hounding
site.
people. You've been on there for a while?
Yeah, yeah, I've been on there, I think, since they first opened it. And yeah, it's a great way to
As a
meet
guest
interesting
and as a
people.
host, you're a guest and a host.
Yep.
Cool. Very
Yeah, so
cool.
yeah, if you ever want to come on my show, we can talk about something
S-
too. I tend to have one of two shows with guests. One show is kind of biographical. So,
Yeah.
like you said, you can just talk about yourself, and we can just look at the things that you've done. You're obviously an interesting guy, right? And so we can just talk about your things. The other thing we can do is an episode like Norm and I do, where you can pick one or two words, right?
Wow.
If you want, you can just pick Catholicism,
Yeah.
right? And we can come on and just talk about that concept.
That's
Or
cool.
we can do both kinds of them. You
Yeah.
can come on more than once.
Okay.
I'm not
Okay.
a stickler, but
Yeah, yeah. I mean, the biographical one is less interesting, but I'm open to both. But definitely to kick around ideas, like that's my thing. Is I just like playing with ideas, and that's why I find it a little bit strange when people get defensive about ideas. Like we're just playing with ideas. What's the problem? Like there's no harm,
right.
no harm, no foul. Like I throw an idea out there. It might be stupid, okay, but just throwing it out there. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Like let's play, let's have some fun, you know. So
right,
that would
exactly.
definitely be interesting to chat about all kinds of topics. I mean, there's nothing out of bounds. Now, I'm a complete moron when it comes to politics and economics. Like I'm always bragging about what a moron I am that way. But science, philosophy, religion, there's so many things to talk about, and so I'm looking forward to it, my brother. And thanks again for taking the time on short notice.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
We'll talk soon.
All right, sounds good.
God bless you. Bye. Bye bye.
Bye.